Welcome to our deep dive into the early life of Confucius.
Yes.
Excerpts here that, well, they shed some light on his journey
Hmm.
from, shall we say, humble beginnings to a place within the aristocracy.
Yeah.
It's a period that's often skimmed over, but
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's pretty key to understanding how his philosophy took shape.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
What's fascinating is that we often think of Confucius as this established figure,
right,
but his path wasn't straightforward.
right.
He had to navigate a society obsessed with lineage, and his own background presented some unique challenges.
His father,
Quite.
he was from this aristocratic Kong family,
Yeah.
but his mother was a commoner.
Mm-hmm.
So already we see this tension
Yes.
between his lineage and the social reality he was born into.
Exactly, and that tension is going to play out throughout his life.
Oh, yeah.
Even after his father's death, when he was recognized as an heir
Right.
and allowed into the Kong family,
Hmm.
it wasn't a smooth transition.
I imagine not.
He couldn't just assume the privileges of an aristocrat.
Right.
He had to earn his place.
Which makes his approach to education even more interesting.
Yeah.
He didn't have the typical upbringing of an aristocrat.
Yeah.
No inherited knowledge, no
Right.
private tutors.
Yeah.
He was almost entirely self-made, wasn't he?
It's striking how different his education was.
Yeah.
He began formally studying at 15,
Mm-hmm.
which was quite late for the time.
Oh.
And he had this just insatiable curiosity, practically grilling the staff at the imperial temple with questions,
Really?
much to the annoyance of some of the more, let's say,
Yeah.
established nobles.
He was kind of the original why kid, huh?
Yeah.
Except his questions actually led to some profound insights.
Mm.
It makes you wonder if he'd had access to the traditional aristocratic education,
Right.
with all its assumptions and biases.
Yeah.
Would he have developed the same drive to question and learn for himself?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
His outsider status almost forced him to become an autodidact,
Right.
seeking knowledge from unconventional sources.
Uh-huh.
This likely shaped his later emphasis on learning being accessible to all,
Right.
regardless of social standing.
Yeah.
He embodied the Gen Z ideal, proving that worthiness wasn't about lineage,
Right.
but about continual self-cultivation.
This is interesting because even after being accepted into the Kong family,
Yeah,
he still faced social discrimination.
right.
There's that famous story about the banquet hosted by the Jisun clan,
Yes.
where he was publicly snubbed by a young nobleman named Yan Hu.
Yes. That incident was a pivotal moment.
Yeah.
Yang Hu from the powerful Ming Sun family
Right.
essentially dismissed Confucius due to his mother's commoner background.
Oh.
What's almost Shakespearean about this is that Confucius's father,
Right.
and Yang Hu's father were actually part of the same aristocratic circle back in the day,
Wait, so their fathers were buddies
essentially.
and their sons become rivals?
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up.
It's almost like it's scripted,
Yeah.
but it really highlights how Confucius,
Right.
despite his efforts, was
Yeah.
constantly bumping up against the rigid social hierarchy of the time.
And this wasn't just a personal slight.
No, this speaks to the core of what Confucius would later challenge.
Yeah.
The idea that worth is solely determined by birth.
Right.
He experienced firsthand how lineage could be used to exclude and marginalize,
Wow.
even when someone was demonstrably striving for self-improvement.
This raises an important question then.
Yeah.
If Confucius valued merit, how did he reconcile that with the realities of unequal access to education?
Right.
After all, not everyone could forge their own path like he did.
That's a question that scholars still debate today.
Yeah.
Some argue that his emphasis on ritual and tradition,
Mm.
which we'll delve into later,
Right.
could be seen as reinforcing existing hierarchies.
Yeah.
But others contend that his vision was ultimately about creating a more just and harmonious society,
Yeah.
where merit and virtue were the guiding principles,
Right.
not simply accident of birth.
It's a complex issue for sure.
Absolutely.
But what's clear is that this early experience of being both an insider and an outsider
Right.
deeply shaped Confucius's worldview.
Yeah.
It pushed him to question the very foundations of his society
Mm.
and ultimately led him to develop a philosophy
Yes.
that emphasized personal growth, ethical leadership, and the transformative power of education.
Absolutely. We left off discussing how Confucius's unique background, that push and pull between insider and outsider, really shaped his outlook.
Right.
It's fascinating to see how this period, directly feeds into his later teachings,
Yeah.
particularly his ideas about social mobility and meritocracy.
You know, it's one thing to personally embody the idea that worth isn't tied to lineage, but it's quite another to challenge an entire social system
Exactly.
built on that premise. how did he bridge that gap?
Yeah.
Did he just start preaching about meritocracy or?
He was much more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Remember, this is the spring and autumn period, a time of upheaval and uncertainty.
Right.
The old order was crumbling,
Yeah.
and traditional hierarchies were being questioned.
Yeah.
Confucius saw firsthand the limitations of a system based solely on birthright,
Right.
a system that often bred corruption
Yeah.
and ignored real talent.
So in a way, the chaos of the time created the perfect environment for his ideas to take root. People were already looking for new answers, new
Yeah.
ways to understand their place
Right.
in a rapidly changing world.
And this is where his concept of the junzi comes in.
Yeah, the Gen Z.
Now, we often translate this as gentleman or superior person,
Right.
but it's much more than just good manners and etiquette.
Right. It's about cultivating inner virtue regardless of your social standing. And that must have been a radical idea at the time.
Absolutely.
Imagine telling someone born into the peasant class
Right.
that they could become a junzi, a
Yep.
person of moral excellence,
Mhm.
on par with any aristocrat.
Precisely. It offered a path to social mobility and self-cultivation
Wow.
that transcended the rigid boundaries of the existing social order.
Yeah.
And you can see how his own experience directly informed this concept.
Right.
He wasn't born into privilege. He had to earn his way, prove his worth through hard work and self-cultivation. He was living proof that the Junzi ideal wasn't tied to lineage.
It's almost like he was saying, look, I'm a Junzi and I didn't get here by inheriting a fancy title.
Right.
It's about character, not bloodlines.
Exactly.
Which makes his emphasis on education even more interesting.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about accumulating knowledge. It was
No.
about transforming the individual.
Absolutely. For Confucius, education wasn't simply about memorizing facts or mastering skills.
Right.
It was about cultivating virtue-shaping moral character
Right.
and preparing individuals for responsible leadership.
Right.
It was, in essence, a path to becoming a Junzi.
But wasn't there a risk of his ideas being co-opted by the very elites he was critiquing?
Yes.
After all, if education is the key to becoming a Junzi,
Right.
wouldn't those with more resources and access to learning have an advantage?
That's a really astute observation.
Yeah.
And it gets at the heart of a debate
Yeah.
that continues to this day.
Uh-huh.
Did Confucius ultimately reinforce existing power structures, or did he offer a genuine path to social change?
Right.
It's a complex question with no easy answers.
Which I have a feeling is exactly how he would have liked it.
Right.
He never gave simple answers, did he?
No.
His teachings were all about encouraging critical thinking and self-reflection.
You're right. He was more interested in asking the right questions
Yeah.
than providing dogmatic solutions.
Right.
But let's not forget his emphasis on ritual, which often gets overlooked in modern interpretations of his philosophy.
You know, it's interesting because on the surface, ritual seems like the opposite of self-cultivation.
Yeah.
It's about conforming to established practices,
Right.
following a set pattern of behavior.
Mhm.
But with Confucius, there's always more beneath the surface, isn't there?
Exactly. Remember that story about him mimicking ancestral sacrifices as a child?
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just a game.
Right.
It was a sign of something deeper, this yearning for connection,
Yeah.
for belonging to something larger than himself.
And he later realized that rituals, when practiced with sincerity and understanding,
Yeah.
weren't just empty gestures.
Why?
They were a way to connect with the past, embody shared values,
Yeah.
and create a sense of community and purpose.
Precisely, for Confucius, ritual wasn't about blind obedience to tradition.
Right.
It was a way to cultivate virtue, strengthen social bonds,
Yeah.
and restore a sense of order and harmony to a society that was fracturing at the seams.
So in a way, he was using the tools of the establishment. Yeah.
These ancient rituals
Mhm.
to promote a new kind of social order.
Right.
One based on merit and shared values,
Mhm.
not just inherited privilege.
It was a brilliant, albeit subtle, strategy.
Yeah.
He recognized the power of tradition, but he also saw its potential to be reinterpreted and adapted for a new era.
Right.
He wasn't trying to overturn the system.
Right.
He's trying to reform it from within.
It's incredibly clever. And in a society obsessed with lineage and hierarchy,
Yeah.
what better way to introduce radical ideas
Right.
than by cloaking them in the language of tradition and respect for the past?
It's a tactic that's relevant even today, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, totally.
After all, meaningful change rarely comes from a complete rejection of the past.
Right.
It's about finding ways to bridge the gap between tradition and progress.
Yeah.
Honoring what's come before while also pushing for a more just and equitable future.
Absolutely. But we've talked a lot about his ideas, his philosophy.
Right.
But did he ever get the chance to put them into practice?
To actually govern and shape society according to his vision.
That's a great question, and one that leads us to the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Because while Confucius spent much of his life seeking a position in government,
Yeah.
hoping to enact real change, his path to influence was far from straightforward.
We've been exploring how Confucius's early life, all the obstacles he faced, His unusual education,
Mhm.
his drive to prove himself,
Right.
shaped his ideas
Yeah.
about meritocracy and the importance of education and the power of ritual to
Mhm.
create social harmony.
Yeah.
But did he ever actually get the chance to put these ideas into action, to actually like lead and govern according to his vision?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it reveals another layer of complexity to the man.
Okay.
Because while Confucius was deeply committed to his philosophical ideals,
Right.
he was also a pragmatist.
Okay.
He understood that change rarely happens in a vacuum.
Right.
It needs fertile ground to take root.
So he wasn't just a philosopher in an ivory tower.
No, not at all.
He actually sought out positions of power,
Yes.
hoping to influence the course of events.
Absolutely. He spent years searching for a ruler who would embrace his vision for a just and harmonious society.
Right.
A ruler who would embody the principles of the Junzi.
Right.
He envisioned a government led by ethical individuals, guided by wisdom and compassion, not just by power or lineage.
It's almost like he was searching for like a real life embodiment of the Junzi ideal.
Yes.
A leader who would put his philosophy into practice.
Exactly.
But exactly find his Plato's philosopher king, did he?
Unfortunately, no.
Oh.
While he did hold some minor government positions in the state of Luz, he never found a ruler who fully embraced his philosophy or was willing to implement his ideas on a large scale.
Right.
It must have been incredibly frustrating,
I bet.
especially for someone so passionate about social change.
It makes you wonder, how do you reconcile those two sides of yourself?
Right.
The idealist who believes in a better world and the pragmatist who has to navigate the messy realities of politics?
That's a tension that many reformers throughout history have grappled with.
I imagine so.
And in a way, Confucius's inability to find that ideal ruler
Right.
might have been a blessing in disguise.
Really? How so?
Because it forced him to rethink his approach
Okay.
and ultimately led him to focus on something even more powerful:
What's that?
education.
It's like that saying, if you want to change the world, start by teaching.
Exactly.
It's a long game, but perhaps a more enduring one.
Absolutely.
By focusing on cultivating virtuous individuals.
Yes.
He was planting the seeds for a different kind of leadership, a different kind of society
Right.
to emerge over time.
Exactly. He shifted his focus from trying to change those already in power
Right.
to shaping the minds and hearts of those who will become the leaders of tomorrow.
Wow.
He gathered a dedicated group of students, sharing his wisdom and insights,
Yeah.
hoping they would carry on his legacy and build a better world piece by piece.
And it seems like his gamble paid off.
It did.
His students went on to become teachers and advisors themselves, spreading his ideas far and wide.
Yes.
It's fascinating how someone who never achieved high political office
Right.
became one of the most influential figures in human history.
It's a testament to the enduring power of ideas
Yeah.
and the profound impact a single individual can have even without wielding traditional forms of power.
It's true.
Confucius reminds us that true leadership isn't always about holding a title or commanding an army.
Right.
It's about inspiring others, nurturing their potential, and planting the seeds for a more just and compassionate world.
That's beautiful.
It really is.
It's a powerful message and one that feels incredibly relevant today. We
Absolutely.
were surrounded by so much noise, so much vying for power and influence.
Yes.
But Confucius shows us that real change often starts with a quiet commitment to education, self-cultivation, and building a better future. One student, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time.
And that's perhaps the most enduring legacy of Confucius.
Yeah.
The idea that each of us, regardless of our social standing or political influence, has the capacity to become a Jinzi,
Right.
to embody virtue and contribute to a more harmonious world.
Right.
It's a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us centuries after he walked this earth.
What a fantastic journey this has been. Thanks for guiding us through the twists and turns of Confucius's life.
My pleasure.
And for showing us how his early experiences shaped his ideas and ultimately changed the course of history.
I hope this deep dive inspires you to explore further.
It has. Thank you.
Because as Confucius himself said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.